Hey, what's up, fantasy football fans? This is Mitchell with FF Real Talk, and we're gonna get right into the waiver ads for week 4. As for week 3, observations. We're just gonna make this real quick. Um, it's just another rough week in terms of fantasy, and it's for a different reason than the last couple. The first one, the first week is always, a little sketchy in terms of what happens. Last week, as I said before, is the most injury-riddled week I'd ever seen, and this week was just another week where the people you paid high for or drafted early, a lot of them didn't perform, and it's hard to win when that thing happens, but that's the nature of fantasy. And what's happening is you got players with just flat out blowing production like all year, pretty much like Matt Forte, Demarius, and Aaron Rodgers, or players with moderate production, but they're killing you because they're not playing up to par like Drew Brees or LaShawn McCoy. And then you got the injury and suspension stuff like Jamal Charles and Adrian Peterson. I tell you, it's a lot of the people of the top 10 are killing us right now. Everybody I mentioned in this list right here were among the top 12 players, and a lot of them, are hurting us, and you can't look at it as anything other than the way it goes often in fantasy. And the problem is you're just gonna have to grin and bear it, because you're not going to be able to trade these guys generally for the value that they're worth. And you're not going to be able to bench them because there's going to be very few people on the bench that will be a better start option than those guys, unless you're in a really shallow league or unless you really drafted super, super well and you're loaded. The only thing I can advise you right now is not to panic. Unless there's a really good trade out there, somebody's offering you a stud for a stud, or they're trying to get rid of their problem for your problem, because your problem might help them in the long run and theirs might help you in the long run. You just gotta have to hold tight and just bear with this whole thing as players flesh themselves out. And hopefully injury isn't the biggest concern like all the Jamal Charles owners. And I'm also going to reiterate the thing I said in one of my 20 fantasy rules, and it was something that I was discussing in a comment recently. You still have to start your studs. I don't care what the output is thus far. We'll take Matt Forte, for instance. He's been bad all year. And if you got him within the first 5 to 6 picks. And he's been bad all year. But there's going to be no conceivable situation where I'm going to bench Matt Forte unless, say I'm in a shallow league and my third running back was Rashard Jennings, and I'm going to play somebody else at flex, a receiver or something, and then I have Matt Forte and I have Rashard Jennings. Maybe I would play Jennings over Forte if the matchup is right, but most people don't have that perceivably good of a team to be able to do it. You're going to have to play Matt Forte. You draft your top players for them preferably, generally, not even preferably, generally, to be matchup independent. They're going to have weeks that they struggle, but you're not drafting them and then trying to play the matchup game. Like, for example, I'll tell you even proof of how it works. People ranked Le'Veon Bell really low this week because he was facing the Carolina D. Didn't make a difference. Matchup independent. People thought because Emmanuel Sanders was going to face the Seattle D, he wouldn't have a good game. Doesn't matter. Matchup independent. Or even in the converse way where you think they're gonna do good and they don't do good. It just happens that way. And for all the people that were saying, well, in the situation where you have Aaron Rodgers and you want to play, you want to think of not playing him against Seattle like you did in week 1. If you ended up playing a player over him, that was a good call. But we saw Phillip Rivers come in the next week against that same defense and shut it down. And we saw Peyton Manning, make some fantasy relevance in the fourth quarter to make his week somewhat presentable. But it's not always, when you draft Aaron Rodgers, you play Aaron Rodgers unless he's on bye or unless he's hurt. Unless you have a backup, like say in week one, there was a guy that was here that had Matt Ryan. I think that was a good call because Matt Ryan is even a number one in certain leagues. But you don't go to the waiver wire getting a quarterback to replace Aaron Rodgers because you're scared of the Seattle defense. There's going to be no one value based out there to spell him. And that goes for Alfred Blue if you're trying to pick him up off waivers this week to start over Matt Forte. There's no way on any fantasy situation short of injury that I'm going to bench Matt Forte because he's not producing so far for an Alfred Blue or a Taliaferro because they're out there. It's just, this is a common sense thing. And there's going to be weeks where you're just going to be dead wrong with it. That's what this is. But when it comes to me, it's all about playing the percentages and playing the probabilities. But I'm going to tell you, like I tell a lot of people, that, send me sit questions on Twitter. At the end of the day, always go with your gut. If your gut tells you that I really believe Alfred Blue is going to get 40 points this week and he's just going to really outshine Matt Forte, start Alfred Blue. And don't listen to me. Don't listen to any of the experts that you talk to. Go with your instinct. And that goes for all parts of life. This isn't fantasy information. This is life. Go with your gut all the time. It just so happens to be my gut almost always aligns with logic, and my gut's not going to start Alfred Blue over Matt Forte. So, but I digress. That's not really the point. I feel everybody right here on these weeks so far that has been hard. I'm in 1 and 2. I'm 1 and 2 in more leagues than I should be right now, but I got hope that I'm holding out on, and I hope everything gets better, and it should. Now, I talked way too long about that, but hopefully, it means something to whoever it does. If not, just discard it as a whole and carry on. But as for the waiver pickups, the number one is pretty much who I've said in the last 2 weeks, but for some reason he got dropped in a lot more leagues this past week, and I believe it was because of his production and because in my case, I dropped him in a couple of leagues because I was trying to get up on the Bobby Rainey thing because I really thought he was going to do something this week. Kelvin Benjamin. And this week, I don't have the percentages on. Just trust me, these guys are lowly owned, and it will be, in your advantage to pick them up. Kelvin Benjamin is very, very lowly owned, and he was dropped, like I said, in a lot of leagues. But this week should be the answer. He did good in week 1, didn't do good in week 2. Week 3, 8 for 115 with a touchdown and 11 targets. His usage can't be any better than this. His freakish talent makes him just even more of a great option, and he's the number one option, period, for the Panthers. And not only at this point is he a must own, to me, he's getting to the point where he's a must start. So, after this week, we shouldn't be talking about Kelvin Benjamin anymore. I don't even want to have him on this list because he should be owned across the board. I think this is the one that will prove it. Number 2 is another person that should be owned, and I've been saying him for the last couple of weeks. Brian Quick, still low owned, and this week he had low targets this week, but he's still proven to get into that end zone. And the thing about him that's questionable is something I did also, don't know if I mentioned at the beginning of this, we're entering one of the harder parts of the season. It's called what I call the bye week squeeze, where you got players that can't play for you. And Brian Quick is one of the teams that's on bye this week. You might be able to skate on not adding him this week and adding them the following week, hoping somebody else forgets, and et cetera, because you might, if you add them here, you might need to add someone else who you could actively use as opposed to a low-owned percentage guy like him. But keep him in mind for week 5 when he does come back. He's having some great production, and I'm seeing it to continue as the rest of the season goes on. And next, we got Lorenzo Taliaferro. He was 18 carries for 91 and a touchdown. That's a good, solid production. And I like him for two kind of default reasons. I don't trust Bernard Pierce, and I don't like Justin Forsett as a player. And neither do the Ravens. They don't like either one of those guys really either. If they didn't have to use them, they wouldn't. And 18 carries, that's a good amount for one of the first feature times out there. I think you're going to see a little bit more of that because, like I said, you can't trust Bernard and Bernard Pierce, and you can't, and it's nothing to like about Justin Forsett. So he's almost virtually unowned, so it will be a good idea to pick him up because somebody's got to carry it with this whole Ray Rice thing being gone now. Somebody's got to carry it, and he has a good chance as any to be able to shine, so pick him up. Number 4, for anybody who needs a quarterback, there shouldn't even be a thought at this point now. Kirk Cousins, 427, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Second best fantasy week of any quarterback this week. He reminds me a lot of Nick Foles in terms of he has the potential to have these big weeks, but then at the same time, he can just be middling or whatever, disappointing when you need him. But again, there's a lot of quarterbacks that are kind of owned, from like Jake Locker to, Eli, although Eli had a good game this week, to, anybody who lost RG3, that this guy, is a great add-on. And I'm thinking about picking him up in several of my leagues because I see him he got some scheduling things he's got to deal with, but I see this being a constant because he's fighting for a job, and Jay Gruden, I think, is fighting for him to keep that job, though RG3 is fighting to get back. I personally don't think RG3 is going to be with Washington anymore, but after the end of this season. But Kirk Cousins is a really good add if you need a quarterback. Number 5 is 2 people, Andrew Hawkins / Miles Austin. Andrew Hawkins had 7 for 87 with 10 targets, and Miles Austin 6 for 51 and a touchdown, 7 targets. This is another situation like Brian Quick where both of them are on bye this week. So you don't have to spend anything now. They're both, with Andrew Hawkins still getting all these targets, he's still unowned out there. So keep your eye on him for, when week 5 comes along. It's a lot of receivers out there that you own that aren't doing much. And it's, to me, Andrew Hawkins is proven that they're the guy. He's the guy that Brian Hoyer is really looking for. And Miles Austin, him being healthy, you're seeing it. 2 straight games with a touchdown. And it's like I say, I think it's going to get more and more, and both of them are getting targeted. And with Jordan Cameron still trying to work his way into form. Now, this is why you don't want to pick him up this week. Cameron is working his way back into form, and he's going to have this week to be able to get healthy. So it's going to slowly shift to Cameron being the number 1 option like he was intended to be at the start of the season, especially with this week off that they have. But still keep an eye on both Hawkins and Miles Austin. Number 7, Owen Daniels. By default, he's a strong tight end pickup this week. Everybody knows that they saw it. Dennis Pitta went out for the year. There was nothing statistically good that Owen Daniels did this past week, but you saw what he did in week 2. Owen Daniels, if anybody remember his noise that he made back when he was in Houston, that is a real for real tight end. He's older now and sort of getting phased out, but he's the number 1 option at this point with Dennis Pitta out. So this is a guy you're going to want to pick up. I think this is going to pay itself dividends overall as the year moves on. And like I say, I think after this, he needs to be, if you need a tight end, it'd be a great option to grab because he won't even be fighting for tight end carries. I mean, not carries, but targets. So it's a real solid ad, which leads to the next one, which is another tight end. And I had him in, I think he was in my honorable mention last week, and I referred him to a couple guys on Twitter. Niles Paul. Again, and my reasoning for Paul is simple. they want Jordan Reed. They want to be targeting Jordan Reed a lot. They wanted to be doing it from the preseason on, but he's been hurt all year. And as long as Jordan Reed is out, Niles Paul is going to be getting these options, these opportunities rather that he's getting. 6 catches for 68 yards on 9 targets. This is going to continue. This isn't going to stop. Kirk Cousins needs him. He needs this safety valve that tight ends always provide, so you can see this continuing on. As long as Jordan Reed is out, Niles Paul's value remains the way it is. And again, if you have tight end deficiencies, which most of us do, unless you got Graham, Thomas, or maybe Gronk, with the way Tom Brady playing, this Gronk thing is getting... Anyway, I'm not even going to talk about Tom Brady now. But, yeah, Niles Paul is a good pickup to have. Number 8, I want to say that was number 7 or 8, is Alfred Blue. Alfred Blue, I just mentioned him as an example, a detractor example of not to use him over a stud, but he's worth mentioning. He didn't have anything huge this week. He had 13 carries, but his carries are increasing week by week. And why is that? Because he's the second option to a heavily injured, oft-injured person, which is Arian Foster. Arian Foster is expected to be back, with this week, but again, he's so injured so often and for different reasons. It's sooner rather than later that Alfred Blue's usage is going to pick up, maybe even become a committee, so he becomes pretty valuable. Keep your eye on him. If you don't want to add him this week, makes sense, but especially with the fact that Arian Foster is expected to play the next game, but he's something to keep your eye on, because as running backs at this point, once you start getting to the 4th week of the season, the waiver wire starts getting much thinner and scarce. So Alfred Blue is definitely somebody you could be looking at. The next one is Jeremy Kerley. This is another player that I generally hate owning in fantasy. He's just always a problem to me because he's so inconsistent. But at the same time, with Decker hurt, you can't ignore it. I mean, he got 11 targets last week, 7 for 81 with a touchdown, and every year he does this, though. He'll have a good game that'll make you tempted to grab him, and then the next thing you know, he has 4 straight crap weeks or whatever have you. And I tell you, we'll just have to see. But he's somebody to keep your eye on, because again, with Decker being out, you ascend to being the number 1 option. And though it doesn't really much matter with the Jets, it's someone to keep your eye on, because opportunity is opportunity. And number 10, the last one, will be Jordan Matthews. He was one of the guys I mentioned as a sleeper going into the season. He's, a lot of people will think it's sort of like Allen Hurns, which it kind of is, but to me, a little less fluky because of this main thing here. I see now, and I think everyone should, if your eyes are open, Riley Cooper's usage and everything about him is going to revert back to who he was before last year, when he knew he had to play for his life. And as far as I'm concerned, he's getting phased out, which he should be, and as far as I'm concerned, deserves to be. But as long as Cooper is coming to a point to where he's not really being used or not really producing, Jordan Matthews' chances increase. He had 8 catches for 59 yards, which isn't much by yards, but you can't ignore the 2 touchdowns. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And it's, again, when it comes to that fast-paced offense, I had him as a sleeper in the beginning, so this is something that you can definitely keep your eye on and be able to use at some point down the line. I mean, maybe a few weeks out, but definitely something solid. And another honorable mention I want to throw out there, this isn't a sure thing at all, but DeAngelo Williams. And I say that for one reason. He was dropped in a lot of leagues over the past 2 weeks because he was hurt. But this is why it would be a decent time to pick him up. Jonathan Stewart is hurt now, and he's going to be hurt a while. Mike Tolbert is also hurt, and I'm not sure how long that's going to be, but they have no choice. And this is the week that he's supposed to be coming back. We've seen this before where DeAngelo Williams be the only option or whatever, and it doesn't necessarily help. But with the fact that Cam is really monitoring his rushing, it kind of has to happen. So it would be a good, decent person to add. And I'm not sure what his percentage of ownership is right now. It's probably over 60%, but he's out there in a number of leagues. And if you pick him up, he might be able to turn over some value. So that might be somebody to look forward to, or, to take a look at, week to week. But yeah, that's the list right there. And like I said, don't get too discouraged out there with the way things are going so far this season. For all you Demaryius owners, you Aaron Rodgers owners, Drew Brees, LaShawn McCoy, and hopefully Jamal Charles, and Matt Forte, keep your head up, man. It's got to pick up. It has to. This is the reasons they're who they are. So you kind of gotta, recognize that these things happen, and just don't make hasty moves, and definitely don't drop them. If you find an option that's startable over them, that's a solid option, it's okay to do, but don't make any hard or rash decisions right now. So, so good luck out there in week 4. And if you got any questions, please send them on Twitter. That's the best way to reach me as opposed to comments here. It's at FF Real Talk. And please follow me on Twitter. And I know a lot of people don't want to tell their secrets. If y'all view me as anything, that's adding to some benefit of you guys out there, a lot of times people try to keep things to themselves. But, I do this for viewership to grow. You know what I'm saying? It gets me motivated. The more people that follow, the more people that respond, the more people communicate with me. So, don't be shy. Tell everybody about me, and then no one's really a secret anyway. You know what I'm saying? This is all based on our opinions out there, and my opinion is going to be different from others. It's going to be different from others. So, but the thing always comes to logic, and logic is no secret. So, again, just have a good week 4, and hit me on Twitter if you have any questions. All right, y'all take care.